Hello again, everyone. This is Pleb Rising, and I'm back with another edition of the PR Report. Today it's episode 5, and we're continuing our look at the sovereign individual, mastering the transition to the information age, and taking a look at Chapter 5, the life and death of the nation state, democracy, and nationalism as resource strategies in the age of violence. And I jotted down here, they start off with a tale of two walls, important piles of historic rubble. They talk about in 1495, Charles VIII blew apart the walls of San Giovanni, kicking off the Gunpowder Revolution and signaling the transition into the Industrial Age. This is characterized by the fact that returns to violence were on the rise. They compare that with roughly 500 years later. In November of '89, the fall of the Berlin Wall marked the end of Soviet-dominated state socialism, signaling human society's transition from the industrial to the information age. This is characterized by the fact that returns to violence were now falling. So these two walls served different purposes. The former was to keep predators out, the latter was to prevent citizens from escaping. Why? Well, the authors point out that during the industrial age, nation-states that consistently dominated in the deployment of violence experienced the most success. Violence in the industrial age favored magnitude over efficiency. It was more important to have the largest army. Size mattered more so than what you did with it. Nation-states able to amass the largest armies were the ones best at extracting wealth from its citizens. If you need your citizens from which to extract wealth, you want them to stick around. So the Berlin Wall was symbolic of communism's constant threat of physical violence and control asserted over their population, but it was also more nuanced than that. Preventing people from fleeing ensured greater wealth extraction opportunities for the state. Same thing in the West, but the assertion of control was less obvious. It wasn't physical or violent. One could or one may expatriate. It was just a heavily taxed event. And I noticed something interesting when I was taking a look at this is that in the U.S., no matter what one's reason for expatriating is, if you qualify for any of the 3, quote, tests that the IRS has laid out, you're automatically considered as leaving to avoid taxes. So it doesn't matter why you actually might be leaving. If you qualify for any of these 3 tests right here, the income test, the net worth test, or the compliance test, in their eyes, it's because you're avoiding taxes. And so democracy became the militarily winning strategy because it facilitated gathering of more resources into the hands of the state. The U.S., quote, won the Cold War because they just happened to be better than the competition at seizing resources from its citizens. Viewing the U.S. government as a business, its inputs are tax revenues seized from its citizens, and its output is full spectrum security services, as evidenced by all the military bases across the globe. This business tends to behave like one run by its employees, i.e. the elected officials. And when you have businesses run by employees, they tend to favor policies increasing employment, oppose reduction in jobs, are generally less interested in keeping costs down, or to reduce prices charged to their customers. And the quote from the book points out that governments controlled by its employees would seldom have incentives to either reduce the cost of government or the price, i.e. taxes, charged to their customers. However, where conditions impose strong price resistance in the form of opposition to higher taxes, governments controlled by employees would be more likely to let their revenues fall below their outlays than to cut their outlays. In other words, their incentives imply that they may be inclined toward chronic deficits. Another thing going hand in hand with democracy as we know it in the West here is nationalism. And in a simplified view, nationalism encourages state support by emphasizing common characteristics such as language and group identification derived from state interests. It allows mobilization of larger armies at a smaller cost. For example, if everybody's speaking the same language, edicts are more quickly issued and understood. When everybody's speaking a common language and thinking common ideas, it simplifies the tasks of bureaucracy and facilitates rule less dependent on the intervention of intermediaries. So democracy and nationalism greatly improve the ability to extract wealth from the citizenry during an era requiring adequate funding of a large military where success was more dependent on magnitude than efficiency. Another quote from the book, the new megapolitical conditions of the information age will make it increasingly obvious that the nation-state inherited from the industrial era is a predatory institution. And in order for nation-states to survive, they must continue to extract huge amounts of wealth from its citizens. So are we seeing any of this today in the U.S.? And I jotted down 3 things that I noticed just within the past week that do support this view that in order for nation states to survive, they must continue to extract huge amounts of wealth from its population. So just in the last week, I saw three things. One was talk of a proposed tax on unrealized gains. There's also a suggestion of a 15% patriot tax for those who end up with 0% income tax liability. And people in the government proposing these things called Fed accounts, which are basically bank accounts for individuals and entities that allow them to have more control over finances, dispersal of payments. And also talked about in this proposal, it would also let the New York Fed short stocks or intervene in the market if they felt like a bubble was forming or it needed a boost here and there in certain aspects of economic activity, so on and so forth. I'll put links for all these claims in the description so you may follow up if you wish. This new era has the trait of favoring efficiency over magnitude. Nation states may not survive in their current forms simply because the large-scale militaries they evolved to fund are no longer needed in an era fueled by microprocessing-based technological innovations. This gets back to the theme of the book, which is the new revolution of power, liberating individuals at the expense of the 20th century nation state. And with a quote from the book that says, "Ultimately, new institutional forms will have to emerge that are capable of preserving freedom in the new technological conditions, while at the same time giving expression and life to the common interests that all citizens share."